Friends, if you want to watch the most talked about upcoming movie Mickey 17 in English, then you are in the right place. If you are visiting our channel for the first time, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss any exciting updates. In today's video, we are going to talk about Mickey 17, the film that has been making waves for its unique concept, star-studded cast, and the vision of its brilliant director. We will explore what this movie is all about, why it has become one of the most anticipated releases of 2025, and where you will be able to watch it when it finally hits screens. I will give you all the details about the OTT platforms and satellite channels where the movie will be available. We will also dive deep into the film's technical department, its music, the pre-production process, filming journey, and post-production work. Along the way, we will uncover facts about its budget, possible box office performance, and all the behind-the-scenes buzz. Of course, we will also discuss the storyline of the film, give you a small spoiler-free review, and talk about what makes this movie so different from anything we have seen before. We will go through the star cast, highlight the performances, and share who is playing which character. We will also explore some fascinating facts about the making of the film and why fans across the world are so excited. That's why I request you to watch this video till the end, because there's so much to uncover about Mickey 17. So, let's get started. Spoiler alert for the 2025 film. Mickey Barnes signs up to be an expendable for one simple reason. He is running out of options. On a deep space mission to the ice world Niflheim, that job title means he is the crew's crash test human, sent wherever a human might die so the rest don't have to. If he bites it, a new Mickey is reprinted from a stored brain backup and shuffles out of a meat printer with all his memories intact. That setup gives the story a ticking existential clock from the very first scene and turns every corridor into Schrodinger's hallway. You're alive until the next terrible assignment says otherwise. The inciting disaster lands hard. Mickey 17, 17th times the charm, gets sent planetside to wrangle a spiky native life form, promptly plummets into an ice fissure, and is written off. Protocol says print a replacement. So the crew boots up Mickey 18. Then the twist. Mickey 17 isn't dead. Carried out of the ice by the very creatures he feared, he limps back to base and finds someone else. Him, but louder, sleeping in his bunk, flirting with his partner, and cramming his life into the same jumpsuit. That double occupancy premise flips the clone trope into a screwball identity crisis. Bong layers the gag with a sly plant and payoff. An early snafu during the reprint process leaves Mickey 18 a little off, which turns the two Mickey dynamic from awkward to volatile. The film stays linear, but the perspective keeps hopscotching between iterations, so we feel the friction of two men sharing one soul and one paycheck. From here, the conflict blossoms in three directions at once. First, there's the colony's politics, a swaggering military governor who treats ethics like a speed bump, and a science wing that sees Mickey as data with legs. Second, there's the frontier western tension with Niflheim's natives, misunderstood creepers, who are far more organized than the colonists assume. Third, there's domestic comedy with teeth. Mickey 17 trying to keep his relationship, his job, and his literal identity while Mickey 18 barges through the plot like a chaotic roommate who can't be evicted. When the brass slap bomb vests on both Mickeys and shove them outside to prove their usefulness by harvesting alien trophies, the movie morphs into a darkest timeline office team-building exercise. Stakes go from personal to planetary as the Mickeys realize the only way to survive is to stop playing the colony's rigged game. Midway, the narrative pivots from man versus environment to man versus machine and man versus man. Mickey 17 learns to communicate with the creepers, and that single shift, understanding instead of conquering, reframes the whole mission. The dual protagonist trick becomes a moral prism. 17 leans empathic and strategic, 18 leans impulsive and wrathful, and their push-pull keeps scenes jangling between slapstick, menace, and negotiation. Bong uses the reprint mechanic like a drum fill between verses. Every time someone threatens to kill a Mickey, the question isn't, will he die? But, what does dying mean when the printer is still plugged in? That's where the tension lives, death as a bureaucratic reset, and life as whatever you can protect between resets. The last act rips the band-aid off. The governor bears down to crush any peace talks. The science team's dirty laundry tumbles out. The creepers demand justice on their terms. In the snowfield standoff, Mickey 18 chooses the most direct line between 2 points and detonates himself along with the tyrant. A perverse martyrdom that clears the board but leaves only one Mickey standing. With the gun barrels finally lowered, Mickey 17 and the colonists broker a truce with the creepers that look suspiciously like an actual future. The coda lands its emotional punch by taking away the easy out. Mickey 17 destroys the reprint device. He picks mortality over being property, love over replaceability, and a name over a number. The story began with a man escaping debt by leasing out his life. It ends with him buying it back the only way that counts, by making it finite. Tonally, the movie is a high-wire act that wobbles on purpose. Scenes swerve from Looney Tunes pratfalls, a newly printed Mickey slopping out of a pod, to wince-inducing body horror, to crisp political satire, sometimes in the span of a single exchange. That genre shuffle isn't just spice. It's the grammar of a world where humanity has outsourced risk to a photocopier and convinced itself that counts as progress. The fun is in how the film keeps weaponizing tone. You laugh, then flinch, then notice what you laughed at and feel a little indicted. It's bleakly hilarious that the colony needs two identical men to expose the leadership's lie. It's moving that only one gets to walk away. And yes, for a director famous for ending on a bruise, this story glides toward an unexpectedly optimistic note. Hard-won peace, accountability, a future that isn't built on someone else's respawn. The optimism works because it's earned, not granted. Underneath the cloning shenanigans and ice planet spectacle, the narrative keeps tapping the same exposed nerve. What is a life worth if the system can print you again tomorrow? The plot answers with action beats, a fisher, a hunt, a hostage trade, a self-detonation, but the heart of it is smaller and stranger. It's two versions of the same man arguing over who gets to be real, a romance that survives being copied and pasted, and a colony that only becomes human when it stops trying to be immortal. That's the trick of Mickey 17's storytelling. It looks like science fiction about expendability, but it plays like a messy, heartfelt fable about choosing to be irreplaceable. Mickey Barnes isn't just a protagonist. He's a personality split by a photocopier. Mickey 17 arrives as the kind of guy who has learned to survive by apologizing to authority, laughing off terror, and pretending that a job title like expendable doesn't mean what it obviously means. His growth starts the second he realizes that being reprinted isn't the same as being alive. Every mission chips away at his shrugging, go along nature until he's forced to stake a claim on the one thing the colony keeps trying to repossess, his identity. The turning point isn't a fistfight, it's the first time he says no to a task that treats him as equipment. From then on, his choices start to belong to him rather than the system, and that shift hums under every scene like a bassline. Then there's Mickey 18, the chaos version history didn't order but got anyway. He's not a mustache-twirling clone. He's a man with the same memories but slightly different wiring, impatient where 17 is reflective, hungry for validation where 17 is desperate for dignity. Watching them share a life is the film's strangest buddy comedy. One makes coffee while the other nearly starts a war. The magic is in how neither is the villain. 18's bluster masks a raw terror that he might be the defective copy, and his arc is a sprint toward maturing at any cost. When he finally chooses sacrifice, it doesn't read as a neat redemption. It reads like a man who has been told his whole existence is optional, grabbing the loudest, most undeniable form of meaning he can find. Their relationship is a masterclass in engineered intimacy. These aren't twins, they're echoes that won't stop arguing. Early on, they bicker about logistics. Who gets the bunk, who gets the job assignments, who gets the girlfriend, but the real contest is existential. Who gets to be Mickey? The film keeps nudging them into situations that make their differences useful. 17 can negotiate with beings everyone else calls monsters because he's learned to listen. 18 can bulldoze through bureaucratic stalemates because he's unafraid to be the bad cop. By the time the plot demands a single unified will, they've functionally become a whole person spread across two bodies, and the decision to compress back into one is both heartbreaking and right. His partner begins as the audience stand-in who refuses to let the word expendable define someone she loves. She's practical, protective, and allergic to the colony's euphemisms, which makes her the first person to treat both Mickeys as people and the first to demand that they stop using the printer as an emotional escape hatch. Her arc is quieter than the Mickey's fireworks, but it's crucial. She shifts from soothing triage nurse to strategic conscience, forcing hard conversations about what a relationship even means when death is a paperwork issue. The way she redraws boundaries, no more disappearing into another iteration, no more shrugging off trauma because a new body can carry it, reframes love as an agreement to be finite together. The governor is a walking thesis statement. Power thrives when people are replaceable. He doesn't evolve so much as calcify, and that's the point. Every scene with him sharpens the stakes because he embodies the colony's worst habit, calling exploitation procedure. His refusal to recognize personhood in the Mickeys or the natives is the gravitational pull the story must escape. When he finally breaks, it's not a twist, It's a collision between brittle certainty and two men who have learned the cost of being treated like tools. He's the character who teaches everyone else what growth is by refusing to do any. On the science side, the lead technician begins as the high priest of the printer, speaking in gentle moral absolutes about data integrity and mission parameters. The fun is in watching cracks appear. It starts with curiosity, why do two people with identical memories make opposite choices, and ends with accountability, an uneasy acceptance that creating life comes with duties that don't fit neatly into a lab report. Their micro-arc gives the film texture. Not every conversion is grand. Sometimes it's a shift in vocabulary from assets to patience to people. Even the aliens get an arc that matters. The so-called creepers arrive as a horror movie silhouette and steadily bloom into neighbors with rituals, grievances, and an ability to mirror the colonists' worst tendencies back at them. Their emissary evolves from a symbol to a character once the Mickeys learn to communicate, and that single evolution, monster to counterpart, reshapes every human on screen. The colony's soldiers become less brave when their enemy has a name. The settlers become less righteous when they realize they weren't pioneers, just loud guests. The creeper's growth isn't about becoming friendly, it's about demanding to be read correctly, and that demand forces human characters to rewrite themselves. As a group, the colonists function like a chorus with solos. The rank-and-file workers, who chuckle at the gallows humor around reprints, have to decide if convenience is worth complicity. When they start pushing back, refusing to treat the Mickeys as replaceable parts, refusing to frame the natives as walking obstacles, the social weather changes. That background evolution gives the central arcs a runway. Mickey 17 can choose mortality because the crowd finally admits mortality is the point, not a bug. The most surprising character isn't a person at all. It's the printer. At first it's a miracle box that erases consequences, a sci-fi vending machine for human bodies. As the story unfolds, it becomes a mirror that reflects the worst human instincts, outsourcing risk, flattening individuality, laundering guilt through technology. The moment Mickey 17 decides the machine has had enough of his life is when he becomes more than the sum of his backups. Destroying it is not a tantrum, it's the final stage of development, the gesture that turns growth from inner monologue to public fact. By the end, the character map looks like a before and after gallery. Mickey 17 moves from borrowed time to chosen time. Mickey 18 moves from loud insecurity to a single, clarifying act. The partner moves from protecting a person to protecting a principle. The scientist moves from neutrality to responsibility. The colony moves from a workflow to a community. The aliens move from threat to treaty partner. None of these changes land with a lecture. They land through choices under pressure, jokes that hide shrapnel, and a world that stops letting survival be the only metric for a life well lived. Robert Pattinson carries the double load of Mickey 17 and Mickey 18 like he's been waiting for a role that lets him argue with himself on screen without anyone calling it overacting. He gives each iteration a distinct rhythm. 17 speaks like he's measuring every word against survival odds. 18 spits his lines like he's daring someone to stop him. It's not just a matter of posture and tone. Pattinson builds two complete emotional maps. Watch closely and you'll see 17's eyes scanning for exits even in quiet scenes, while 18 leans in like he owns the room. When they share the frame, the effect is so cleanly differentiated that you forget you're watching one actor. It's a technical feat, sure, but the real trick is that he makes you root for both, then hurt when only one can stay. Naomi Ackie brings steel to the partner role, and it's the kind of performance that sneaks up on you. She starts as the emotional anchor, grounding scenes with a warmth that feels lived in rather than written. But as the stakes climb, she reveals the flint under that surface. Her delivery in confrontation scenes, calm, deliberate, like someone holding a moral scalpel, cuts through the noise and gives the film its ethical spine. Ackie resists the temptation to turn the role into the stock worried partner archetype. Instead, she plays it like a co-strategist in a survival campaign, which makes her quiet moments land twice as hard. Stephen Yeun, as the colony's lead scientist, plays curiosity like a contagion. He threads the needle between the serene detachment of someone who lives in the lab and the awkward humanity of a man starting to suspect his equations have moral weight. His body language shifts as the story unfolds. At first, hands always busy with tools, eyes on readouts. Later, a stillness that comes from actually listening. Yoon sells the transformation without underlining it, letting the audience spot the change in the pauses rather than the speeches. Mark Ruffalo's governor is all charm curdled into control. He plays authority not as blunt force but as a smirk that never reaches the eyes, the kind of performance where every friendly word feels like it comes with a receipt. Ruffalo leans into the contradictions, making him likable enough that his ruthlessness hits harder when it drops. His timing in confrontations with the Mickeys is razor-sharp. He knows exactly when to let the mask slip, and those moments are small masterclasses in controlled menace. Toni Collette as the mission's political officer delivers a performance that's like an unexpected dash of acid in a glass of water. She plays her role with a kind of bored precision, as if she's seen this moral collapse before and is just waiting to file the paperwork. Then, when the situation forces her to choose sides, she lets the mask crack, not into sentimentality, but into something sharper, a weary conviction that maybe this time, she'll pick the losing side on purpose. It's the sort of layered turn that makes secondary characters feel essential. The performers bringing the creepers to life, through motion capture and voice, deserve their own spotlight. Their physicality is deliberate, alien without slipping into parody, and the subtle variations in movement convey status, emotion, and cultural nuance long before translation becomes possible. The voice work is textured, with tonal shifts that make the alien language feel alive rather than a sound effect. These performances make the eventual human-creeper negotiations feel earned. The audience has already learned to read the alien's intent in posture and pace. Even the smaller roles are cast with precision. Background colonists are given micro-moments, side glances, muttered lines, that suggest entire personal histories. The printer technician who flinches when Mickey 17 asks how many copies he's processed, the soldier who pauses just a beat too long before following an order to shoot, these flourishes deepen the colony into more than set dressing. They make the world feel inhabited by people with their own quiet arcs. What makes the ensemble sing is the way they treat the science fiction premise as normal life. Nobody winks at the camera, nobody plays the cloning gimmick like it's the whole joke. Instead, they root their performances in the banal reality of it, how you'd actually talk to a coworker who happens to be the 17th version of himself. That grounded approach gives the high-concept story a texture of lived-in truth, making the humor sharper, the danger heavier, and the emotions fully earned. Bong Joon Ho tunes the movie like a mischievous metronome, clicking between dread and deadpan without warning, and that tonal gearshift is baked into his shot choices. The very first sequences announce the blend, austere, high-contrast wides of a white, endless Niflheim interrupted by tight, almost impolite close-ups that catch breath fogging in the air and the twitch of someone pretending not to be terrified. He makes danger feel matter-of-fact and comedy feel like contraband. When a reprint wakes up, the camera doesn't trumpet a miracle. It sidles in with a flat, routine angle, as if the machine is a coffee maker. That mundanity is the joke and the horror, and he returns to it like a refrain. Pacing is elastic on purpose. The first act moves like a brisk checklist: mission, mishap, replacement, cut on clean, practical edits that never linger long enough for sentiment to congeal. Then the second act slows and widens. Conversations with natives hold for extra beats so we can read posture and silence, while colony scenes adopt a clipped, bureaucratic rhythm. By the third act, the tempo fractures into two speeds at once: propulsive cross-cutting for political collapse, and long, suspenseful holds whenever a character considers doing something irreversible. That push-pull makes the detonations, literal and emotional, land with a thud you feel in your ribs. Bong uses blocking as character writing. Mickey 17 is often framed just off-center with headroom that feels a size too big, as if the world refuses to fit him. Mickey 18 tends to claim center frame or crowd the lens, a physical swagger that sells his bulldozer instinct before he opens his mouth. When both Mickeys share a shot, the compositions turn into visual coin flips, mirrored eye lines, symmetrical staging that dares you to pick a real one, then breaks the symmetry the second a choice gets made. Doors are a recurring motif, decontamination thresholds, airlocks, office entries, and the way each Mickey moves through them becomes a barometer for who's steering the soul today. Action is staged for clarity over bravado. Instead of shaky coverage, the camera favors anchored vantage points that let geography do the suspense. On the ice, he likes lateral tracking that reveals danger in stages. First the sound, then a sliver of motion, then the full silhouette, so every encounter plays as discovery rather than a jump scare. When chaos erupts inside the colony, the lenses tighten and the cuts get shorter, not to confuse but to compress. Hallways become pressure cookers. You can sense who has agency by who the camera follows and who it glances at from over a shoulder. A few perfectly rude smash cuts turn fatal moments into punchlines, and those jokes are shaped like indictments. Production design and color palette carry thematic weight without anyone pointing. The colony is beige pragmatism and laminated signage, safety orange tape wrapping around ethical compromises. The printer bay is lit like a clinic at shift change, overhead, unforgiving, humming, so that rebirth reads like maintenance. Outside, the planet refuses color until the aliens bring it. Mineral iridescence in their tools, a not quite blue sheen in ice caverns, textures that say culture rather than creature. As trust builds, those textures creep into human spaces. A beadwork pattern shows up on a sleeve, an alien material lines a human shelter, and the frame quietly admits a future that's shared. Sound is a sly co-author. The score sits back at first, letting machine buzz and radio hiss dominate, then sneaks in a low, pulsing motif whenever the plot treats death like policy. In negotiation scenes, music thins to the point of absence so that the scrape of a foot or the click of a clasp feels like a word. The funniest beats are often sound gags, alarms that are too cheerful, a printer chime that lands exactly like an office notification, and Bong times cuts to those noises the way a comedian times a button. When the movie needs to grow a conscience, it does it with silence, a full-body, snow-swallowing quiet that makes the next choice feel heavier. Editing patterns act like narrative grammar. Each reprint gets its own syntax. Some arrive with a hard cut and a hiss, others with a dissolve that lets the old face and the new face overlap for a heartbeat. The overlap is a thesis, identity as crossfade. In dialogue, he favors holding on listeners, not talkers, so we're reading consequence instead of rhetoric. There's a recurring match cut from a human-made grid to natural fractals, colony corridors to ice fissures, printed circuits to alien carvings, that compresses the film's argument into a blink. Two systems, one planet, choose a way to live together. Bong's satire lives in the frame edges. Clipboards are comedy props, safety posters are miniature dystopias, and the governor's office is staged like a charm offensive, soft furniture, warm lamps, so that every violation he orders feels like it came from a cozy place. He shoots briefings like sitcom sets until the moment a policy becomes violence, whereupon the angles harden and the depth of field tightens, the visual equivalent of a smile curdling. The camera is never cruel to the characters, but it is unsentimental about institutions, and that stance keeps the film zippy even when the subject gets heavy. The aliens are given a visual language that matures on screen. Early scenes keep them half obscured by ice fog or shot through layered foregrounds, creating a respectful distance rather than a fear of the unknown cliché. As communication blooms, the frames open, lenses get just a touch wider, allowing body language to read, and the edits start honoring their reaction shots as equal to humans. There's one breathtaking mid-film tableau where both species occupy the same wide, no one centered, and the camera refuses to pick a protagonist. That single refusal does more political work than any speech. Finally, the set pieces earn their size by being about choices, not spectacle. The snowfield showdown is arranged almost like theater, clear sight lines, measured cross-coverage, and a tempo that invites you to beg for someone to speak before someone explodes. When Mickey 18 makes his loud decision, the film withholds the kind of triumphant framing you expect. The shot stays human scale, almost embarrassed by the grandeur, and the cutaway comes a beat early, like the story flinched. That restraint is the director's signature here. Bags of style, yes, but always in service of the one thing that matters. Making every frame argue that a life has value only when you aren't treating it like a disposable effect. The cinematography in Mickey 17 works like a second narrator, whispering details about character and theme without a single line of dialogue. From the first frame, the camera treats Niflheim like an uncooperative co-star, wide, lingering shots that stretch the horizon into a dare. The opening drop sequence frames Mickey 17 as a small, shivering dot swallowed by white, making the planet feel both infinite and indifferent. The lens often stays low to the ground when outside, letting jagged ice walls loom overhead like they're leaning in to eavesdrop on the humans. That vertical tension, sky pressing down, ground pushing up, sets the stage for a story about people trapped in systems that don't care if they fit. Lighting inside the colony leans on institutional glare. Fluorescent overheads bleach skin tones just enough to make everyone look a little tired, a little replaceable, a choice that sells the idea that these people are more parts than personalities in the system's eyes. In the printer bay, the lighting sharpens into clinical brightness, shadows flattened until there's nowhere for humanity to hide. By contrast, scenes with the creepers start dim and diffuse, the light coming from strange angles, reflections bouncing off ice crystals, soft glows from alien tech, so that faces half fade into the dark. As trust grows, the creeper spaces get brighter, their sources revealed, the shadows less about hiding and more about depth. Framing plays a constant game of inclusion and exclusion. Mickey 17 is frequently shot from slightly behind or to the side in the early acts, the lens treating him like someone being observed rather than embraced. When Mickey 18 enters, the camera often chooses over-the-shoulder two shots that make them share the same visual space, daring you to decide who's real without ever confirming. Conversations in the governor's office are framed with just enough empty space between characters for you to feel the air of power imbalance. In negotiation scenes with the creepers, the framing flattens, both sides shown in matching planes, no one in focus over the other, turning diplomacy into a literal visual equalizer. Camera movement is strategic rather than flashy. The film loves slow pushes during moments of doubt, the kind that seem to lean in as if the camera itself is trying to hear the truth. In action sequences, the cinematography resists the urge to swing wildly. Instead, it uses deliberate lateral tracking shots that let you see threats creep into the frame from the edge. The ice fisher rescue, for example, is shot with the horizon tilted just a few degrees, enough to unsettle without becoming a gimmick. By the time Mickey is hauled up, the angle corrects, a quiet visual sigh of relief. There are visual motifs threaded through the film like signatures. Doorways are almost always framed dead center, a visual checkpoint before crossing into a new moral or physical space. Reflections, on visors, ice, polished colony metal, are used to layer faces over alien textures or machinery, blurring identity and environment. One striking shot holds on Mickey 17's reflection in the printer glass just long enough for Mickey 18's printed face to ghost over it. A single frame that says everything about the overlap and erasure baked into their existence. Some of the most beautiful moments happen in stillness. There's a mid-film wide of the alien ice caverns lit entirely by refracted moonlight, the walls shimmering in subtle gradients of silver and pale blue, and the humans reduced to black silhouettes trudging through it. Another standout is the snowfield standoff, cameras on long lenses compressing the distance so the two sides seem dangerously close, the air between them hazy with breath and snowfall, every flake lit like it's choosing a side. Even in intimate moments, the cinematography finds beauty, a handheld shot that drifts just slightly as Mickey 17 and his partner talk in the dark, the only light coming from a spill through an air vent, their faces flickering as if the scene itself could vanish. Depth of field becomes a storytelling tool. Early colony scenes keep backgrounds sharp, showing every other person in the space, reinforcing that Mickey is just one of many. As his arc develops, the backgrounds soften. The focus starts isolating him from the crowd, signaling that he's becoming his own story rather than part of the colony's machinery. In the final scene, when the printer is dismantled, the lens opens wide, swallowing the background into blur until all that's left in focus is Mickey 17's face. Present, finite, uncopyable. The cinematography doesn't just capture the world, it choreographs your trust. It tells you when to feel small, when to feel cornered, when to believe in connection, and when to understand that this frozen planet might finally be thawing, not because the sun came out, but because the people did. The editing in Mickey 17 feels like it was built on a stopwatch that occasionally gets thrown out the window for dramatic effect. The opening act wastes no time, quick, clean cuts that behave like mission logs. Here's the drop, here's the task, here's the problem, here's the printer humming back to life. The rhythm is brisk enough to make you feel the grind of an Expendables job, where death and return are just bullet points on a checklist. These early transitions are almost invisibly efficient. Hard cuts from exterior danger to sterile interiors, no lingering, as if the film itself shares the colony's utilitarian mindset. Then the second act deliberately changes the tempo. The edits stretch, breathing space into scenes where Mickey 17 and Mickey 18 circle each other like mismatched magnets. Bong favors holding shots just long enough for awkward silences to grow teeth. Negotiation scenes with the creepers often play in unbroken takes, the camera watching stillness instead of interrupting it, which slows the rhythm in a way that makes each blink or shift in posture feel monumental. That patience in the edit is what sells the idea that time works differently when you're not on the colony's clock. Cross-cutting is used like a pressure valve. Whenever the tension between the Mickeys threatens to boil over, the edit snaps to another thread, the governor's manipulations, the scientists' quiet debates, the colony's day-to-day churn, before slamming back into the personal drama. This constant toggling keeps the audience from settling too comfortably in one emotional lane. It's especially sharp in the middle stretch, where each storyline starts to mirror the others in tempo. Political maneuvers and personal conflicts both get cut like chess games, every move followed by a pause to let you think about the consequences. Transitions are rarely flashy, but when they are, they're loaded with meaning. Match cuts link the mechanical precision of the printer to the natural geometry of Niflheim's ice formations, turning a simple visual bridge into a thematic echo. Scene changes often happen on sound cues, a door hiss, a printer chime, a breath, that stitch disparate locations together as if the whole colony is breathing in sync. There's a sly dissolve early on that overlaps Mickey 17's reflection with Mickey 18's waking face, compressing their separate timelines into a single visual heartbeat. Pacing in the third act becomes a split personality by design. The political plot hurtles forward in quick bursts, tight, overlapping cuts, radio chatter intercut with marching boots, while the emotional core slows down, often holding on reaction shots a second longer than comfort allows. This creates a rhythm where external events seem to accelerate toward catastrophe while internal decisions stretch out, each choice hanging in the air like a countdown you can't see. The moment Mickey 18 makes his final move is cut with brutal swiftness, no drawn-out build-up, no indulgent slow motion, just an abrupt, decisive punctuation mark that steals your breath because it refuses to give you warning. The film's editing also understands comedy's need for precision. A printer cycle is sometimes cut like a workplace gag. Fade in on a freshly printed Mickey slumping out of the pod with no ceremony, then hard cut to him doing something absurdly mundane, like making toast. These quick, underplayed transitions let humor slip in sideways without derailing the tone. Likewise, arguments between the Mickeys often end not on a line but on a visual punchline, a door closing, a shared glare, a silent walk away, cut just fast enough to make you laugh and then realize the bruise under the joke. What's clever is how the edit mirrors the character's relationship with time. Early on, death and return feel like no time at all, a quick swap, a restart. By the end, when Mickey 17 chooses mortality, the cuts slow to savor each moment, as if the film is teaching you to feel the weight of minutes you can't replace. It's not just pacing, it's a recalibration of how the audience experiences the passage of time, pulling you from the colony's disposable tempo into something more human. The score in Mickey 17 behaves like a heartbeat that keeps changing its mind. Early on it's all pulse and procedure, a tight little motif that ticks beneath the colony's routines, thin percussion and clipped synths that sound like they were borrowed from a maintenance closet. It doesn't swell, it counts. That counting turns the opening missions into choreography, steps, hisses, door seals, until you realize the music is teaching you how the colony measures a life, by intervals and checklists. When the printer wakes a new body, the cue is deliberately small, almost a notification tone, and that understatement is the joke. Resurrection arrives with the same musical importance as a shift change. Then the film opens a second musical door for Niflheim. The planet's sound palette is colder, more resonant, built from breathy textures and long tones that seem to come from inside the ice. The first real encounter with the creepers swaps out the colony's metronome for layered drones and unfamiliar intervals. Harmony loosens, rhythm stretches, and suddenly time feels different. It's not spooky for the sake of it. The music is telling you that there's another logic at work here, one that refuses to march to the colony's beat. As communication grows, those textures stop clashing with the human cues and start braiding with them, low pulses finding common ground with sustained, glassy chords, so the soundtrack itself becomes a treaty. The best gag is how often the film weaponizes silence. Negotiations hold their breath so long you can hear fabric shift, ice settle, a boot scrape. That quiet isn't empty, it's pressure. A joke lands sharper when the music abandons it, and a threat feels more real when there's nothing cushioning it. One mid-film standoff cuts the score entirely and lets the wind take over. The next cue waits until someone makes a choice, then returns with a single, stubborn note that feels like consequence rather than commentary. The silence makes the sound meaningful. The sound makes the silence terrifying. Character-wise, the Mickeys share a theme that splits like a cell. For 17, it's measured and inward, a hesitant line that keeps folding back on itself as if checking the exits. For 18, the same melody is pushed forward, syncopated and impatient, the rhythm tripping over itself to get there first. When they're together, the music sometimes runs both versions at once, one motif in long breathy notes, the other in busy percussion, so your ear gets the same friendly argument your eyes are watching. In a few scenes the lines try to resolve into one phrase and just don't, which is exactly the point. Power gets its own sound. Whenever the governor starts smoothing the edges off cruelty, the score goes politely corporate, restrained strings, tidy voicings, a harmony that refuses to admit dissonance exists. The moment policy turns into harm, that neatness fractures, notes smear, the tidy rhythm staggers, and the polite music reveals the teeth it's been hiding. It's satire by orchestration, the musical version of a smile you stop trusting. In the labs, the cues are cooler and more curious. Small patterns that loop and mutate like something under a microscope, gradually picking up warmth as the scientists start treating subjects like people. Action is handled with clarity rather than bombast. Instead of throwing the kitchen sink at a chase or a fight, the score locks onto a clean rhythmic idea and worries it, adding a layer, subtracting it, interrupting it with a breath. The ice fissure sequence is built on a stubborn two-note figure that refuses to resolve while the camera tilts just a few degrees off level. The moment the rope holds, the harmony finally lands where your ear's been begging it to. Later, during the snowfield showdown, the music does the opposite of what you expect. It thins. Long tones hover just above audibility while boots crunch and radios click, and when the irreversible happens, the cue snaps shut instead of exploding. The absence of a triumphant swell is the whole argument. There are earworm details scattered like breadcrumbs. The printer chime sneaks into the orchestration as a tiny bell, sometimes mocking, sometimes heartbreaking. A processed breath becomes a rhythmic element during panic scenes, turning human fragility into the drum. The creeper's language has a contour the composer imitates with bowed metal and voice-like glissandos, so when understanding arrives, you can hear the human and alien lines find a shared vowel. None of this pulls focus. It's the kind of world-building you notice in your spine first. Most importantly, the score knows when to get out of the way of faces. Reaction shots are often left naked so you can hear the room, not the orchestra. When Mickey 17 stares down the machine that keeps resurrecting him, the cue lies still for an almost uncomfortable length of time, then returns with a pared-down version of his theme. No rhythm, no armor, just the melody, exposed. After all the clever rhythms and textures, it's that stripped, human-scale sound that lands the deepest. The film starts with music that makes life feel routine and ends with music that makes time feel expensive, which is exactly how the story wants you to hear it. Mickey 17's big idea wears a jumpsuit and punches a clock. What is a life worth in a system that can print you again before lunch? The expendable program turns mortality into workflow, and the film treats that as both gag and indictment. Every cheerful procedure, scan the brain, warm the pod, towel off the new guy, asks whether convenience has replaced conscience. The theme clicks when you realize the printer doesn't just erase consequences, it erases accountability. If death is a reset button, who bothers to learn, to grieve, to change? The story's answer is sneaky. The only progress that matters is the kind you can't undo. Identity is the second engine, and it fires because the movie refuses to make the clones interchangeable. Two men with the same memories step into the same day and become different people. That's not sci-fi ornament, it's the argument. Memory isn't identity, choice is. Mickey 17's empathy and Mickey 18's urgency split a single psyche into two survival strategies, and their collisions keep asking a sharp question. Are you real because of what you remember, or because of what you're willing to stand for today? The film's most intimate scenes are just two versions of a man negotiating who gets to be the name on a life, which turns, who am I, into a labor dispute with the self. Labor is everywhere, and it's not subtle. The colony bureaucratizes risk the way modern systems do. Forms, waivers, safety posters that soothe you into complicity. Expendability becomes a metaphor for gig economy bodies, infinitely replaceable, emotionally outsourced, paid in promises of purpose. The movie's jokes about printer cycles land like stingers because they're familiar. We laugh at the idea of a workplace that literally prints backup workers, then consider how often our world talks about people as headcount and bandwidth. The satire bites hardest when the governor sells cruelty as efficiency, because his language is the real machine, euphemism as ethics erasure. Colonialism isn't a backdrop, it's the cold the characters breathe. The settlers arrive convinced they're pioneers and slowly learn they're intruders with better branding. The aliens begin as a horror silhouette and end as a culture, which flips the Taming the Frontier story on its head. The themes bloom in small reversals. The map that's wrong, the weapon that becomes a gift, the monster that doesn't attack first. Communication turns out to be the technology that matters, not the printer, and the film suggests that understanding is expensive precisely because it cannot be mass-produced. You have to pay for it with time, humility, and a willingness to be changed by what you learn. There's a quiet thread about love and consent that gives the science fiction its pulse. If your partner can come back tomorrow, does today's promise still mean anything? The movie argues that intimacy requires finitude, vows only have teeth when time does. Watching the characters renegotiate boundaries around the printer, no more using it to dodge hard feelings, no more rewriting history with a new body, turns romance into a referendum on autonomy. The theme is practical, not poetic. Love is a series of chosen constraints that make freedom possible. Ethics of technology gets the film's best visual metaphor, the printer as mirror. At first it reflects our favorite illusions: control, safety, continuity. Then it starts reflecting things we don't like: our willingness to risk other people, our hunger to skip consequences, our habit of converting people into process. The final choice to unplug it isn't technophobia, it's a vote for meaning over convenience. The story insists that progress without principles is just better tools for the same old harm, and the only way to change the outcome is to change what the tools are allowed to do. Death, of course, is the drum the movie marches to, and it plays a strange rhythm. When dying is easy and returning is routine, the terror isn't loss, it's emptiness. What scares the characters is not the end, but the possibility that their life will never add up to anything more than a repeating pattern. That's why the act of sacrifice hits like a thesis statement. It's not about heroics, it's about closing the loop so meaning can accumulate. Finitude turns minutes into currency, and suddenly the smallest gestures, a refusal, a shared look, a hand held too long, feel expensive. Community and solidarity sneak in through the edges. The colonists begin as a crowd of bystanders and end as participants who have to pick a side between policy and personhood. The aliens start as an obstacle and end as neighbors with grievances worth hearing. The gradual redistribution of empathy, across ranks, across species, suggests a message that feels simple until you try it: we become human by expanding the circle of who counts. The film makes that expansion tactile, letting you see the space in the frame change as respect arrives. Even the comedy has a job. The humor doesn't deflate tension, it exposes it. A printer chime played like an office notification turns resurrection into paperwork, and your laugh curdles as you realize how often we do the same trick in real life. Laugh first, rename the problem, move on. The movie uses jokes like warning labels: bright, attention-grabbing, impossible to ignore once you've seen the hazard they sit on top of. Thread all of this together, and the messages feel less like lectures and more like discoveries the characters earn. Replaceability is a lie that benefits the powerful. Identity is authored by choices, not copies. Technology is not neutral once it starts deciding whose pain can be scheduled. Empathy is a skill, not a sentiment. Mortality is not a bug in the code, it's the feature that lets meaning load. The film doesn't shout these ideas, it makes the audience live inside them until the arguments settle in your bones, which is why they linger long after the ice has stopped glittering. Mickey 17 treats visual effects like architecture rather than decoration. They're not there to be stared at, they're there to hold the whole world up. The colony's habitat looks like it's been cobbled together from scavenged modules and industrial leftovers, every panel, pipe, and seam rendered in a way that makes you believe the set was built by people who had to live there for years. The CGI doesn't just paint over green screens, it works in concert with practical sets so you feel the textures under the characters' hands. Doors hiss with the right weight, frost blooms across metal in convincing patterns, and the lighting of the interiors always matches the alien daylight filtering in from outside. The surface of Niflheim is where the visual effects really flex. The frozen landscapes look hostile in a way that feels less like an artist's concept painting and more like a documentary shot on a planet where the cold is actively trying to kill the lens. The light scatters through the icy air in pale blues and silvers, and the snow isn't clean, it's pitted, crusted, scarred by wind. When storms hit, visibility drops in a choking blur, but you still catch glimpses of silhouettes moving through the whiteout, and those shapes carry enough weight and shadow to make you forget they were rendered in a server farm somewhere. The printer sequences are a perfect example of CGI serving the story without stealing the scene. The process is presented with industrial precision rather than sci-fi sparkle. Layers of tissue knitting together are shown in clinical close-ups, the glass misting as the new body warms, the condensation evaporating under the chamber lights. The visuals here are more unsettling than flashy because they feel like something an actual corporate lab might produce. No glowing magic, just engineered biology clicking into place. When the creepers appear, the design sits in that uncanny space between practical costume work and digital augmentation. Close shots reveal tangible textures, translucent skin stretched over bone-like ridges, eyes that track with subtle muscle shifts, while wider shots let CGI handle the alien locomotion, allowing their movements to stay unpredictable without breaking believability. Their integration into the environment is seamless. When they move through snow, the snow moves too, scattering and sinking around them with the right physical weight. One of the film's most satisfying tricks is how often it hides the line between physical build and digital extension. A corridor might be a real, narrow hallway, but the view out its small window is a fully CGI expanse of frozen wasteland. You never feel the stitch because the color grading, lighting, and atmosphere are tuned so tightly together. That restraint means when the movie does pull off something grand, like the vast alien city revealed under the ice, it lands harder. The city's structures glow faintly under layers of frost, shapes half familiar and half impossible, and the mix of scale and fine detail makes it feel like a place that's been there for centuries. The action beats avoid the glossy, weightless feel that plagues some effects-heavy films. Collisions crunch, impacts spray believable debris, and movement respects inertia. Whether it's a skimmer skidding over ice or a creeper slamming into a reinforced door, the physics are consistent enough that you can track the danger without feeling like you've slipped into an animated sequence. Even digital enhancements to the actors, like subtle breath clouds or frost forming on skin, are calibrated to the same physical logic. Silence and stillness play as big a role in selling the effects as the animations themselves. There are moments when the CGI landscape just sits there, unmoving except for the faint shimmer of drifting snow, and that quiet is what makes it feel real. In a way, the film uses its visual effects like set dressing in a stage play. They're present, convincing, but never shouting for your attention. They let the performances and the story claim the foreground, which paradoxically makes the spectacle more memorable when it finally roars to life. The set design in Mickey 17 is the kind of world building that works even when the camera isn't showing it off. The colony interiors look like they've been lived in, worked in, and repaired 100 times over. Walls are scuffed, panels mismatched, labels peeling. Every surface tells you this place wasn't made for beauty, it was made to last. The layout isn't conveniently cinematic either. Corridors are narrow, corners awkward, rooms cluttered with cables and storage crates. You get the sense that whoever designed these spaces cared more about heat retention and resource efficiency than giving anyone a nice view. Even the furniture feels purpose-built, bolted to the floor or collapsible, a reminder that space is at a premium and survival takes priority over comfort. Then there's Niflheim itself, which feels like a character the moment you see it. The frozen plains are vast but not empty. Jagged ice formations loom in the distance, fissures slice across the surface, and everything is layered in shifting textures of snow and frost. The production design nails the difference between alien and unreal. You believe this planet exists because it doesn't look like a fantasy postcard. It looks harsh, unstable, and dangerous in a way that makes every outdoor scene feel like a risk. Even the light behaves differently here, diffused through an icy haze that gives every shadow a pale edge. The way human-built structures interact with the alien environment adds another layer of believability. Outposts and relay stations aren't pristine, they're half buried in drifts, with weather-stained plating and patched repairs visible on their exteriors. Airlocks are double-thick and heavily insulated, doors opening with a sluggishness that makes sense in sub-zero conditions. The props match the setting too. Frost-dusted tools, portable heaters, comm devices sealed against moisture, even food containers designed to be handled with gloved hands. It's all consistent, and that consistency is what sells the reality. Inside the colony, details quietly reveal how people survive in such an environment. Hydroponic gardens take up whole corridors, lit in stark greens against the cold blues of the habitat's walls. Communal areas are crammed with multi-purpose furniture, a mess of mismatched items brought together by necessity. You can spot personal touches, photos, trinkets, patches of fabric used as makeshift curtains, but they're sparse, like people have learned not to get too attached to belongings that might be lost to the next power failure. The creepers' spaces contrast sharply with human design, using forms and materials that feel grown rather than built. Passageways curve in organic arcs, walls glistening with frost that seems to be part of the structure rather than an invader. Light sources are dim and diffused, more like bioluminescence than electricity, and the symmetry is irregular in a way that suggests a different set of priorities. Spaces designed for movement patterns humans don't naturally follow. Props in these areas are almost unsettling in their familiarity. Tools and objects that hint at parallel technological development but shaped to fit non-human hands. Transitions between these different locations feel deliberate. Moving from the cramped, angular colony corridors to the open, shifting ice fields is a shock of scale and exposure. Stepping into creeper territory is a shift in language, one architecture speaking to another, each telling you something about the people who made it. Even when the story moves quickly, the spaces are distinct enough that you can tell exactly where you are at a glance, which makes the world feel mapped out rather than improvised. It's not just that the sets and locations are beautiful, they're functional. Every choice in the production design supports the survival logic of the world, and that's what makes it believable. You don't get the sense that anything was built for the camera. It feels like the crew just showed up on Niflheim and started filming what was already there. The dialogue in Mickey 17 walks a tightrope between sharp efficiency and sly personality, and it rarely misses a step. Conversations feel lived in, as if the characters have been talking to each other for months before we ever dropped in. The banter between crew members carries the rhythm of people who've shared too many cramped quarters and too many dangerous missions. It's quick, a little sarcastic, but never so polished that it sounds rehearsed. There's a natural overlap in exchanges, moments where someone starts talking before the other person has finished, and it's in those tiny stumbles that the script feels most human. Mickey himself gets a lot of the film's most memorable lines, not because they're punchy one-liners, but because they're loaded with subtext. His humor isn't there just for levity, it's a survival tactic, a way of disarming both the people around him and himself. A simple, offhand comment can tell you he's nervous, curious, and maybe a little in denial, all at once. The writing leans into this, letting wit and vulnerability bleed into each other so the audience feels the emotional shifts without needing them spelled out. The script also uses silence like a line of dialogue in its own right. There are exchanges where the weight comes not from what's said, but from what isn't, an unfinished sentence, a look that kills the conversation dead, or a pause that hangs in the air long enough to make you lean forward. This restraint keeps the emotional beats from feeling over-explained. When a character finally does speak after one of these silences, the words land harder. Conflict-driven dialogue is another standout element. Arguments aren't neatly structured debates, they're messy, fragmented, full of interruptions and half-formed thoughts. You can tell when a character is saying something just to fill the space or dodge the real issue, and the script doesn't rush to tidy that up. This makes the emotional confrontations more unpredictable and, ironically, more cinematic. The Creeper's communication is written to feel alien without turning into a linguistic puzzle that slows the story. Their words, when they use them, are sparse, direct, and strangely formal, but the script plays with rhythm and phrasing to make them sound like they're operating on a different conversational wavelength. The contrast between their style and the humans' more casual, bantering exchanges adds a constant sense of otherness. Even exposition is handled with a light touch. Instead of info dumps, the script hides world-building inside arguments, jokes, and throwaway remarks. A disagreement about a broken piece of equipment might casually reveal the dangers of the planet's weather, or a sarcastic comment about rations tells you more about colony politics than a straight explanation ever could. It's a way of making the necessary background details feel like part of the characters' lives, rather than a lecture to the audience. The film's emotional peaks often hinge on dialogue that's deceptively simple. A short line, stripped of metaphor or wit, can hit with the force of everything the character has been holding back. These moments work precisely because the rest of the script has been so textured. When a character drops the layers and speaks plainly, you feel the shift in your gut. There are also little echoes in the writing, phrases repeated in different contexts, words that change meaning depending on who says them and when. These recurring lines give the film a subtle rhythm, a reminder that conversations don't happen in isolation but ripple through the story. By the end, even a single repeated word can carry the weight of everything that's happened since the first time you heard it. Mickey 17 doesn't just dip its toes into sci-fi, it dives in headfirst, swims to the deep end, and then quietly rearranges the pool while you're watching. At its core, it plays with familiar genre ingredients: space exploration, hostile planets, human survival against the elements, and the ethical knots of cloning technology. But instead of following the standard straight line from mission in peril to hero saves the day, it keeps tugging at the edges of those expectations until the shape of the story feels new. The survival elements are grounded in realism, but they're laced with moments of dark humor that you don't typically see in bleak, high-stakes sci-fi. The danger is real, you believe people could die at any moment, but the script doesn't treat seriousness as a constant requirement. There's a rhythm where tension builds to almost unbearable levels, then breaks with a wry remark or an absurd twist that doesn't undermine the stakes, but reminds you that survival also comes with moments of sheer human absurdity. That mix of tones is rare and gives the film its own voice within the genre. When it comes to action, Mickey 17 avoids the overly choreographed set pieces you might expect. Fights and dangerous encounters are messy, chaotic, and often over faster than you think they will be. Instead of grandiose sequences designed to dazzle, the action here feels unpredictable and dangerous in a way that makes you pay attention. You can't just sit back and watch explosions. You're too busy trying to anticipate who's going to make it out of a scene alive. Suspense plays a huge role, and it's not just about what's around the corner. The film uses psychological tension just as effectively as physical danger. The audience is often aware of certain threats before the characters are, which creates that delicious, slow burn anxiety where you want to shout at the screen. But sometimes it flips the perspective, giving you only fragments of information so you're scrambling to keep up, putting you in the same state of uncertainty as the characters. Drama, meanwhile, is baked into the science fiction premise rather than bolted on as an afterthought. The ethical implications of Mickey's existence are never treated like a background subplot. They're woven into every choice he makes, every conversation he has, every risk he takes. The genre convention of the replaceable protagonist is here, but subverted by forcing you to care about the one person the story keeps telling you is disposable. That inversion turns what could have been a purely plot-driven sci-fi into something that also works as a character-driven drama. Even the alien element, the creepers, sidesteps cliché. They're not just monstrous obstacles or misunderstood victims. The story treats them as a culture with its own logic and survival strategies, and while that might sound like a typical human learns aliens aren't so bad arc, it's handled with enough unpredictability to keep you guessing. Sometimes they help, sometimes they threaten, sometimes they're just operating on rules the humans can't quite crack. In short, the film knows the sci-fi playbook well enough to break its rules with precision. It gives you the satisfaction of genre familiarity without letting you get too comfortable, keeping that mix of action, suspense, humor, and drama in a constant, shifting balance. You never feel like you're watching a checklist. It's more like the movie is having fun seeing how far it can bend the genre before it snaps. Mickey 17 slips its social and cultural commentary into the story like a hidden current. You feel its pull even when the film isn't pointing directly at it. The most obvious thread is the exploration of disposability in human systems. Mickey isn't just a clone, he's a piece of replaceable labor, a body the mission can burn through without much hesitation. That idea echoes modern conversations about how workers, soldiers, and even whole populations can be treated as expendable in the name of efficiency, profit, or progress. The film never turns this into a heavy-handed lecture, but the parallels are there for anyone paying attention. It also pokes at the tension between individual identity and collective survival. Mickey's repeated deaths and rebirths force a question. At what point does the self stop being the same person? It's a philosophical concept, sure, but it lands with real emotional weight because the film roots it in practical stakes. Is the colony's survival worth erasing or rewriting someone's life over and over? That question isn't far from debates we have today about the cost of progress and who pays it. There's a cultural critique in how the colony itself is structured. Leadership is shown as rigid and hierarchical, a system that thrives on obedience but often crumbles when flexibility is needed. It mirrors real-world political systems where those at the top are too insulated from the dangers faced by the people they're making decisions for. The film doesn't shy away from showing the cracks, how desperation, scarcity, and the fear of the other, in this case, the creepers, can warp priorities and justify questionable choices. The treatment of the creepers serves as a metaphor for human history's long record of misunderstanding, exploiting, or outright erasing other cultures. At first, they're seen purely as a threat. Later, the story complicates that perception, but it never fully resolves into a neat moral about tolerance. Instead, it acknowledges that cross-cultural contact, especially when one side is desperate, comes with real conflict and hard compromises. That refusal to romanticize makes the commentary feel sharper and more honest. On a more personal level, the film digs into mental health in extreme conditions. Mickey's humor and apparent resilience mask a growing strain, touching on the way people in high-pressure environments often perform stability while quietly fraying at the edges. The repeated deaths function almost like a science fiction metaphor for burnout. Each time he comes back, he's a little less certain he can keep doing this, and the people around him are unsure how to deal with that. What makes the commentary so effective is how naturally it folds into the plot. The story never stops to announce, here's the lesson. Instead, the themes emerge in decisions, conflicts, and the way characters treat each other. By the time you notice the political and cultural echoes, they've already shaped your understanding of the characters and their world, making the film's questions linger long after the credits. Mickey 17 is the kind of film that doesn't just ask you to watch, it practically dares you to keep up. From the opening scenes, it creates this odd mix of tension and curiosity that hooks you without explaining everything right away. You're dropped into a world that feels lived in, complex, and a little dangerous, and instead of holding your hand, it trusts you to figure things out as you go. That trust is part of why the audience engagement feels so strong. When a movie assumes you're smart enough to connect the dots, you lean forward instead of sitting back. There are genuine laugh-out-loud moments, but they're never cheap or tacked on. The humor comes from character dynamics, awkward truths, and the absurdity of the situations Mickey finds himself in. Those laughs land harder because they often follow intense or nerve-wracking scenes, giving the audience a release before pulling them right back into the thick of it. The balance of tension and humor keeps people emotionally invested without ever letting the mood go stale. On the flip side, the film doesn't shy away from moments that hit hard emotionally. There's a particular weight to scenes where Mickey's mortality, or rather, his unique version of it, collides with the emotional bonds he's forming. You feel the cost of every risk he takes, and when the story slows down enough to let the characters breathe, that's when it sneaks in the gut punches. These moments aren't overscored or overplayed, they hit because they're earned. The suspense is also a major engagement tool. This isn't the kind of sci-fi where you can predict every turn. Sometimes the danger comes from where you least expect it, and other times the big threat isn't as dangerous as the humans dealing with it. That unpredictability keeps the audience in a constant state of low-level anxiety, which, let's be honest, is a great way to keep people glued to the screen. What's interesting is how much it invites discussion afterward. There are moral dilemmas and thematic undercurrents that don't come with clean answers, which means people leave the theater with something to argue about. Is Mickey truly the same person after each iteration? Who in the colony is making the right call, and who's just acting out of self-preservation? Are the creepers villains, victims, or something more complicated? These questions stick around precisely because the film doesn't resolve them neatly. And then there's the repeat viewing factor. The first time through, you're so focused on what's going to happen next that you might miss how meticulously the world is built. Tiny visual details, background conversations, and subtle character beats that add layers once you already know the basic plot. Watching it again isn't just about catching Easter eggs, it's about seeing how every small choice feeds into the bigger picture. The film rewards that kind of attention, making it the sort of story people want to revisit, dissect, and debate long after the credits roll. Stack Mickey 17 against the rest of Bong Joon Ho's work and you can see the family resemblance immediately. The deadpan to dread gear shifts of Parasite, the industrial satire of Snowpiercer, the creature empathy of The Host, the corporate kink of Okja. But instead of putting society on a train or a hog farm, it stuffs it into a frostbitten colony where a broken labor contract has been disguised as cutting-edge science. The humor is the same sly species, people saying perfectly reasonable things in absurdly unreasonable systems, but the sci-fi scaffolding gives Bong a new toy box. Printers that make people, habitats that look like HR manuals turned into architecture, and a frontier that answers back. Where Parasite weaponized staircases, Mickey 17 weaponizes airlocks. Within sci-fi proper, the film sits at a messy, delightful crossroads. Take the cloning anxiety of Moon and speed it up, bolt the death-as mechanic from Edge of Tomorrow onto it, and then swap out militarized repetition for workplace bureaucracy. Like Moon, it asks whether copies inherit a soul. Unlike Moon, it refuses to isolate the question in one room, crashing it into relationships, politics, and a whole colony's workflow. The icy paranoia nods toward the thing, but replaces body snatcher dread with a moral mystery. Who is the real you when paperwork says both of you are authorized? Arrival's linguistic diplomacy is an obvious cousin, yet here the translation problem is doubled. Human to alien and human to other human who is also you, so every conversation is a multi-species identity seminar with frostbite. If you're filing it next to corporate dystopias, it chats easily with Blade Runner 2049 and Gattaca, but it swaps neon melancholy for fluorescent normalcy. The film's future isn't stylishly cruel, it's politely efficient. That tweak makes the satire feel uncomfortably current, closer to Black Mirror's office hours nightmares than to chrome-plated cyberpunk. Where 2049 broods and glides, Mickey 17 shrugs and keeps working until the shrug becomes a riot. Even the action vocabulary is different from the genre's usual showboating. Think Children of Men's grounded geography more than gravity-defying spectacle, with set pieces arranged around choices rather than gadgets. As a star vehicle for a dual performance, it plays in the same sandbox as Enemy and The Double, but with a populist streak. Instead of turning doppelgangers into purely cerebral puzzles, it throws them into arguments about rent, schedules, and romance. The result is closer to an existential buddy movie than an art house hallucination, which lets the crowd enjoy the trick while the philosophers in the back take notes. It also dodges the clone story cliché where one version is secretly evil. The tension comes from temperament, not mustaches, which is both fresher and funnier. Measured against survivalist space fare like The Martian or Gravity, this one refuses competency porn. Problems aren't solved by one brilliant plan, They're negotiated through stubbornness, empathy, and occasionally blowing something up because diplomacy ran out of snacks. That tilt makes the film feel less like a tutorial and more like a parable, with the visuals doing world-class immersion while the script elbows you toward bigger questions. Compared to Annihilation's cosmic weird, Mickey 17 keeps its feet on the ground. Icy, treacherous ground, but ground, trading dream logic for policy logic and finding horror in the memo. Zoom back to Bong's filmography, and the novelty clarifies. Snowpiercer framed class warfare as a one-directional track. Mickey 17 lets it sprawl outward, messy and municipal, with middle managers and printer techs complicating every clean revolution. Okja externalized empathy via single creature. Here empathy is internalized and duplicated, a person arguing himself into being. Parasite calibrated tone like a trapdoor. This film uses the same calibration with a timer that keeps resetting to 0 every time a body prints. It's new terrain without abandoning the old map, a genre piece that borrows the best tricks from its neighbors and still manages to feel like it's smuggling something unruly and alive under its parka. Mickey 17 is a scavenger hunt of symbols wearing parkas. Start with the most obvious talisman, the printer. It is less a machine than a mirror that refuses to flatter, reflecting our urge to make consequences optional. Every time a body slides out of that glass coffin, the film holds up a question about continuity. Are you looking at survival or at a photocopy of responsibility? The printer's clean lines and office bright lighting double as corporate absolution. It turns the sacred into procedure. When that box is finally unplugged, it reads as a right, not a plot point, the reintroduction of scarcity so meaning can exist again. Ice is the planet's personality and the story's worldview. Frozen surfaces promise clarity and deliver treachery. Everything looks solid until it isn't. Thin ice becomes a metaphor for institutional certainty. The colony walks on it with clipboards and confidence, then flinches at the first crack. The occasional thaw is never warm. It's a rearrangement, like ethics in a system that still wants the shortcut. Caverns refracting pale light suggest knowledge bent by conditions, and when humans and creepers finally share those spaces, the shimmer turns into a visual treaty. Two ways of seeing overlapping without collapsing. Doors and thresholds do relentless thematic work. Airlocks, Deccan chambers, office entrances. Each one is a checkpoint where policy attempts to police personhood. Who gets through, who waits, who is buzzed in with a bored wave speaks louder than any speech. Watch how Mickey 17 hesitates in doorways early on while Mickey 18 barges, and how that choreography flips as identity stakes sharpen. The film trains you to read door etiquette like a moral graph. Crossing without consent equals power, asking to cross equals respect. Reflections stage the identity duel. Helmet visors, printer glass, ice panes, surfaces turn into screens where you catch two faces at once, or one face that doesn't quite align with its own movements. These doubled images make a visual argument that memory is an overlay, not a guarantee. A recurring ghosting effect, one reflection fading as the other sharpens, becomes a silent vote in the election of who gets to be Mickey today. When reflections finally disappear in a crucial scene, the image feels almost indecently honest. No backup, no echo, just one life on the line. Numbers quietly weaponize bureaucracy. 17 and 18 are less names than barcodes, a grim little joke about how systems simplify what they cannot care about. The jump from 17 to 18 is minuscule mathematically and gigantic existentially. It's the one-digit gap where jealousy, affection, rage, and mercy all try to fit. The film keeps the arithmetic visible on labels, logs, and mission slates, so every tender moment arrives stamped like inventory, and every act of rebellion starts by scratching off a number. Breath becomes a clock you can see. In the cold, every exhale writes time into the air, proof that a body is present and paying the cost of being alive. Scenes that hinge on trust let breath fog mingle in the frame. Scenes that hinge on control keep one set of breaths lit and the others subdued. It's an unspoken meter. Fog-heavy frames equal vulnerability. Clear air equals the illusion of invulnerability. When the score drops out and you only hear breathing, the movie is telling you the meter matters more than the line. Safety culture props are visual satire in plain sight. Caution tape, laminated posters, emergency pull cords, the detritus of concern, decorate choices that are anything but safe. A cheery safety icon above the printer bay lands like a punchline. A checklist by the airlock becomes a confession booth for people who want rules to launder guilt. Even the alarm tones double as metaphors. Jaunty chimes for catastrophic events, politeness as camouflage for harm. It's the sound and signage of modernity insisting everything is fine while everyone knows it isn't. Human versus alien architecture maps the politics. The colony is Euclidean, grids, angles, repeated modules. Creeper spaces are fractal, curves, asymmetry, growth-like patterns. When match cuts bounce from corridor lattice to ice-carved filigree, you're watching two value systems rhyme without agreeing. Later, when a strip of alien material lines a human shelter or a human tool hangs in a creeper alcove, the set dressing stops being background and becomes thesis, hybridity as survival strategy, not decoration. Food and domestic clutter are small, stubborn metaphors for dignity. A mug that keeps reappearing, a patched blanket, a stash of seeds in a drawer, objects that say a person lives here, not a serial number. The joke of a freshly printed body-making toast is doing two jobs. It undercuts the grandiosity of resurrection and insists that the ordinary is the miracle worth saving. In a world that can fabricate life, meaning still has to be brewed, buttered, and shared. Explosives and ropes carry opposing metaphors of connection. The bomb vest is coercive linkage, a forced tie between a body and power. The climbing line in the fissure is chosen dependency, the literal lifeline that allows trust to become action. One binds to control, the other binds to community. The film keeps these tools visually rhymed, straps, clips, harnesses, so the difference between them is never the hardware, it's the consent. Light is a moral currency that changes hands. Colony light is overhead and flattening, the illumination of audit culture. Creeper light is lateral and soft, the illumination of context. When negotiations earn ground, pools of alien glow leak into human rooms. When power retrenches, fluorescents snap back on like a reprimand. The final images reserve their brightest, most directional light for unambiguous choice, branding the frame with a clarity the story has been negotiating toward all along. Finally, silence is the heaviest metaphor, a pause that costs. Where dialogue would normally explain, the film spends whole beats listening, to wind, to breath, to boots grinding ice. That stillness isn't empty, it's the price of being finite. In a narrative obsessed with replacing time, silence arrives as the only thing you cannot print. It turns each decision into an object with weight, and each frame into a reminder that meaning accumulates best when there isn't a machine waiting to erase the bill. Mickey 17 isn't a franchise installment in the strict sense, but it behaves like a world with a long tail. Its source is a recent novel that treats expendability as a labor contract, and the film inherits that core idea while widening the lens. A colony with bylaws, a rival species with a negotiable future, and a machine that makes the economy of death suspiciously efficient. That architecture is sequel-ready without the movie dangling obvious hooks. If someone ever returned to this universe, there's clean runway in three directions at once. Other colonies with their own printer policies, a post-printer society learning to budget risk like grown-ups, and human, creeper diplomacy evolving from ceasefire to culture shock to shared governance. Within Bong Joon Ho's personal timeline, it reads like a synthesis project. Snowpiercer compressed class warfare into a train. The host taught audiences to empathize with what the plot calls a monster. Oak just skewered corporate ethics with a smile that slowly curdled. Mickey 17 folds all three into a colder container. Industrial satire in fluorescent lighting, creature understanding that becomes cross-cultural policy, and a labor allegory that replaces meatpacking with human duplicators. As a career move, it's less a detour than an expansion of territory. Proof that his tonal whiplash and moral X-rays work just as well in space parkas as they do in urban basements. Historically, it slots into a lineage of science fiction that treats cloning and resurrection as philosophy you can stub your toe on. The genre has toggled between noir melancholy and laboratory puzzle boxes. This entry pushes the discourse sideways by making duplicability a payroll category. Instead of asking whether a copy has a soul in a vacuum, the film asks what happens when HR has an answer and a policy PDF. That shift drags the thought experiment into the municipal. Permits, rationing, safety briefings, grievance procedures. It's a small but meaningful pivot in the clone canon, swapping metaphysical dread for administrative cruelty. As a franchise that isn't, it quietly plants recurring motifs that could carry across installments without feeling like productization. Numbers replacing names are an instant serial language. Door etiquette as a moral index could be read across new settings. The printer's chime, half lullaby, half indictment, works as a world logo you hear instead of see. Even the bilateral architecture tells you where sequels might travel. Grids for humans, fractals for creepers, and the evolving hybrid spaces where future stories could stage their arguments. Culturally, it arrives in an era when prestige science fiction has become the place to argue about work, ownership, and consent, and the film leans into that mood. It shares DNA with recent speculative narratives that treat technology not as a miracle but as a management strategy. The historical context isn't rockets and wonder, it's logistics and liability. That makes the movie feel of its moment without handcuffing it to headlines. You can sense the broader conversation about replaceable labor, extractive frontiers, and polite authoritarianism humming under the plot, which is exactly the sort of hum that sustains revisits and invites expansions. If someone were mapping a franchise Bible, they'd find thematic arcs as sturdy as plot ones. Post-expendable identity would ripple through families, law, and medicine. Interspecies contact would stop being an event and become a curriculum. Technology would have to re-earn its license in a society newly allergic to euphemism. None of that requires a returning villain or a cosmic MacGuffin. The antagonist is the habit of convenience, and that enemy regenerates faster than any clone. Even without official sequels, the historical context of the director's filmography gives it continuity. The same way Snowpiercer's class allegory echoes into Parasite's architectural chess, Mickey 17's printer logic will echo wherever Bong next aims his camera. The trick he keeps refining, use a high-concept machine to diagnose a low-concept cruelty, travels well. In that sense, this film already contributes to a larger serial narrative, a decades-long autopsy of systems that label people as parts, and the messy, funny, painful ways those people refuse the label. Here's how Mickey 17 stacks up in terms of budget and box office performance, delivered with the same playful spirit as the film itself. The movie cost a whopping $118 million to produce, a hefty price tag for an original, offbeat sci-fi adventure. On top of that, marketing reportedly added around $80 million, bringing the total to roughly $198 million. At the box office, Mickey 17 mustered an opening weekend of approximately $19 million domestically, which isn't terrible for a non-IP sci-fi, on par with films like Ad Astra and Jupiter Ascending. But just below the surface, fans were already bracing for trouble. International receipts added up to about $87 million, and the worldwide total landed around $132 million. Those numbers fall well short of the $240 to $300 million estimated global box office needed for break-even. Industry estimates later projected a $75 to $80 million loss for Warner Brothers on the theatrical run. Why the shortfall? Many viewers pointed to underwhelming marketing. One common sentiment was that the campaign barely made an impression and didn't represent the movie well. Expectations were high for Bong Joon Ho, but by Hollywood standards he isn't a guaranteed box office draw. Some suggested that if Mickey 17 had been budgeted closer to Snowpiercer or Okja, it could have broken even. In places like France, the movie still found an audience, ranking 17th place with over 1.1 million tickets sold, showing a modest regional presence. Mickey 17 looked and felt like a blockbuster, visually bold, ambitiously satirical, but its economics tell the story of a daring gamble that didn't quite land. It's a reminder, fascinating ideas and cinematic craft don't always guarantee financial return when budgets rise without deep-rooted audience familiarity. Here's how you can experience Mickey 17 in all its heady sci-fi glory, and let me guide you to the viewing setup that best suits your vibe. Theatrical experience. Mickey 17 blasted into theaters across the globe in early 2025, premiering in London, hitting South Korea in late February, and finally opening in the US on March 7th. If you saw it back then, you caught its larger-than-life visuals, color contrasts, and immense soundscape in the environment it was meant for. Now streaming, the instant way in. For most viewers today, the film is resting comfortably on HBO Max, available to stream if you have a subscription. That's the easiest and most accessible option, especially when you want immersion at home. Subtle score cues and binder-clad bureaucracy all benefit from your own surround system or headphones. Digital rental or purchase, for collectors and keepers. If you prefer a one-off investment, Mickey 17 is ready to rent or own on platforms like Prime Video, Google Play, Apple TV, and Fandango at home. These versions often offer high-quality 4K visuals and immersive audio formats like Dolby Vision and Atmos.